Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 555 of the Constructive Criticism Podcast. I'm your host, Izzet. We got the full crew today. We got Mason.
Hello, hello.
And we've got Abe.
Howdy doody.
Howdy doody indeed. Today is the day where we dive into preparation for SCG Con Minneapolis RC. We're going to talk standard. All about standard. I'm excited for it, but I'm also excited that we're all here. I love it when we're all here, and I just want to say I missed you guys. And yeah, let's dive in though. Standard is in an interesting place. If this is your first time, this is not one of those power ranking, or I guess if it's not your first time, this isn't going to be a power rankings episode. We're not power rankings the super and the RC today. We're gonna talk about our thoughts and kind of just go into it and use the data that Frank Karsten has, as well as some possible other data. I did something interesting with the CCMTG Patreon testing team that I really wanted them to post and develop their thoughts, guys, before the RC this weekend, so that they could either defend their thoughts or develop their thoughts based upon the things that have happened. And I'm kind of curious, where were you guys in standard before this weekend? I was kind of all over the place. I did not feel like the format was solved. I felt like there were 12 different decks. I'm curious if either of you felt the same way.
I would say that going to this weekend, I had some pretty strong opinions. I kind of thought the red, like Corey Cutter, and to some extent even like mice sort of decks, or like kind of the bar you had to beat. I was very high on Oculus and thought that kind of Omni and Pixie were the decks below. Thought Domain might do well because people were just cutting sideboard cards for it, less about its raw strength and more about like just positionally people cut cards, and then that deck does do something very powerful. And that's sort of where I was heading into things, and was telling a lot of people, like, if you're not going to play the Steel Cutter cards, you should probably be playing Oculus. And that was kind of my like thesis statement going into the European RC.
I think that I might have said the exact words that you just said to somebody. The first time that somebody glacial dragon hunted an Oculus into the graveyard and killed my my Swift Spear, I was like, oh, or not Swift Spear, Slick Shot Show Off. I was like, oh, okay, this deck, like, this deck has like a real discard outlet that like does something. It really has legs, and there's a ton going on with this deck, with Mako, with everything that it had. It was the deck that I actually told somebody that I would play before the RC. I don't know if I still have that opinion, but
yeah, I think that I didn't have it as defined down at decks as you guys did. I definitely felt like Izzet Prowess, and specifically the card Corey Steelcutter, had drastically warped the landscape of the format. Like the games, and I think that we saw it in the results too, like the games have really become about the early developing stages even more than they were before. And I think that Steelcutter as a card really lends that, because it is just has been such a potent way and proven to be such a powerful card and efficient way to run away with the game while frequently impacting the board. And I think that Oculus naturally plays a good spoiler to that by being a bit bigger on the same time frame. So while I hadn't quite been in that same level of preparation, as like my evaluation of the format was really, and still I think continues to be, like, Corey Steelcutter is the card of the format, and everything else kind of revolves around the games it presents. Yeah. So to what you guys were saying about like Domain, I think that anything that was going to compete with it had to be something that had a game plan that could out snowball or outboard state a Corey Steelcutter, and that really narrowed things down to just a handful of decks.
Yeah, I had a meeting with the CCMTG testing team about the rules of engagement, and one of the decks that we identified that got to ignore some of the rules was the Omniscience deck, the Azorius one. And it was a deck that we that people had not played. Some people on the team had not played yet, and naturally, a lot of people became really high on it. Just like it got to circumvent some of the things that we're talking about now. And going into this weekend, I would not have been surprised for it to even be the best performing deck. It was really strong, and I don't know. I think that the format is I don't know that it's like flipped on its head. I obviously like Pixie and Mice not, and rules specifically not showing up is very interesting for some of the higher performing decks, but I don't know, like people also just did not register Gruul Mice. Like people didn't register Gruul Steel Cutter at the RC almost at all.
I mean, why do you think that is?
That's a good question. I think that the thing that I said to somebody was like, I think I said it in our Discord. It's just like, I don't know that I've been convinced that mono red isn't just like the safest choice still. And this came after I lost. I mean, it was a little results oriented when I posted it because it was after I lost a match with Izzet Prowess to mono red, and I was like, well, if this match is like not good, like there's no way that you shouldn't just play mono red. And I don't know that like that my matches were indicative of the format, but mono red still did very well, and I still don't know. Like I think that deck is so good. The mana is so clean. It is being a deck that doesn't have to pay pain lands, that gets to play some of the best 3-drops in the format, gets to like extend its games in weird ways. Like I've always wanted Burst Lightning to be a card in Standard because I always liked it before, and it turns out that Burst Lightning still really good in those like just like it was in Boros aggro in its original printing. Like any deck that can like both have initial burst damage and then also figure out a way to extend the game gets a lot out of it. So,
did you have thoughts on like the win rate in the matchup? I know that based on just the RC data, like mono red came out behind to Prowess.
Yeah, I
had a 42% win rate.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the data did surprise me on that one specifically, because I was winning from the mono red side and losing from the Izzet side, and I think that one of you, I think it was actually you, Abe, just mentioned just like the importance of the early game and like its impact on mulliganing. I think was something that I didn't appreciate before this RC.
So do you feel like you were maybe keeping hands that like weren't
probably
from either side that weren't leading to the hands that actually win? Because I know that some of the players who I've talked to, especially shout out Matt Tumovich, who's worked a lot on his Prowess in preparation for Minneapolis himself. Like he said, what really changed for him and his win rate was identifying in like even just the Izzet Prowess mirrors. He was like, I was kind of trying to go bigger, but the game is actually about being smaller. Is his evaluation currently. I think that like the more that mentality sets in, the more it makes sense why you see like you think, oh, maybe the little bit bigger red deck might be better, but if the matches are actually just about racing more than they're about grinding or like stock up and consistently applying pressure is better than drawing a Screaming Nemesis, then right. It's just a lot about the conventional wisdom of the matchup.
Yeah, I also think I was gonna say just also adding things like Draycatcher to the deck was something that sort of popped up over the weekend too, kind of in mass or a lot more. I think that also helps with the mono red matchup, having just like a solid body I can play on turn 2 that makes some of your draws a little awkward. Definitely, I think helps swing the needle, a percent or two, but that's meaningful over a large sample size.
Yeah, I really like both of what you said there, and I think that I fell into the trap of like. I immediately saw the Tear Hearth Elemental deck and was like, oh, well, this is like an answer to my problems. Like, obviously, this is the this is the way to build this deck, especially with like, having put a lot of time into cutter tear decks in other places, in preparation and stuff, and it didn't necessarily play out that way. Like, I think that the Izzet deck actually wants to be taking like game actions that are pretty impactful. I think that's why we saw a version that did pretty well with, like, I think it was it 7 shock effects, like 2 torch or 2 shock, 1 torch, 4 burst lightning. There was a version that looked like that. That was like, okay, so like we've decided what this format is about when we get to like this level, and I think that the Izzet Terror deck, which is the deck that I was starting to like until right before this event, I actually did not put it on my like top 3 decks. And it was because I was like, this deck doesn't get to play Terror as a cutter card like maybe the Dimir Terror deck that we were trying would get to. So
Yeah, I think the thing about Izzet Prowess and sort of, something that jumps out to me about the deck heading into the weekend, and then post this weekend, if you haven't seen it, Izzet Prowess was the most played deck with also the best win percentage, which doesn't always happen. You might be the most played deck and actually have like a sub 50%. Just sometimes it's like averaging out, or your deck maybe wasn't as good as people thought, but this deck did well. It was kind of known by everyone that like Izzet Prowess is a deck. I know some people were low on it than others, and some preferred mono red or Gruul cutter, but for the most part, I think it was pretty well known, and people just, I think, kind of thought that there has to be something that can kind of definitively beat it. And there's a lot of reliance on things like temporary lockdown, which are just not enough against this sort of deck. And it's really established itself going into this weekend with Minneapolis of like, you need to have a plan for Izzet Prowess or be beating it, because it is brutally efficient, and has some of the highest ceilings in the format when it comes to like powerful draws, while being fairly consistent and being able to mulligan. Now it also has low lows, like you have any deck with 8 cantrips. That's going to happen in some number of games, but this deck is very impressive with lots of flexibility and sees its sideboard cards a lot, which is very powerful when you have decks like Azorius Omniscience, in the format. You need to be able to have either a fast clock or your card that matters, and this deck, has both of those things. So I've been very impressed by this deck.
Yeah, I was listening to Jerry T on a podcast while I was cleaning my garage this week, and one of the things that he talked about is like, we're a big fan of like, playtesting face up or like cheating and playtesting and stuff, and one of the things that he didn't like about that is like, that just like that's not like realistic. You're like not presenting realistic scenarios, which I disagree with. But one of the things that I found really interesting that he said is like, in most games they're gonna play out pretty normally. Like they're gonna play out pretty normally. And one of the things that Izzet Prowess specifically does really well playing the deck is that your normal draws don't even involve the steel cutter. Like you have slick shot draws, you have steel cutter draws, you have this town ain't big enough draws depending on your build. You've got just auto draws. Like it kind of has a lot of the best cards, and its good draws happen to have cutter, but also like it doesn't need cutter. The burst damage from like slick shot, for example, I was playing some matches today with the deck on my lunch, and it's like slick shot shove, still a very good magic card, still quite good. So
yeah, I also think it's just an aggro deck that it doesn't fall, and this was a big strength of red last form, but it doesn't fall over when you hit like 4 or 5 lands, right? Like it constantly has uses of its mana, in large part thanks to things like this town ain't big enough, and the talent, more so the talent than anything. But like this is just a deck that like you get to sort of continuously play and have a lot of game to it. And so I've sort of switched over to like I very much think the Prowess deck is not even at its like final form, you know what I mean? And I think it's going to keep innovating and get better. And I'm very high on this deck, and I'm having a hard time, saying it over other decks. I think there are other good decks. Saying other decks over it. I misspoke there. But yeah, I think Izzet is sort of my kind of clear number one. And I've tried lots of things to beat up on Izzet, but it's just so hard to actually beat this deck. And I think that is in large part to what you're mentioning of just it has so many different draws that are so consistent. So,
and I don't know how you guys feel about this statement, but something that I felt coming into the RC was that, like, looking at the Moto results, following them pretty carefully, there were some like glimpses of, oh, there's weakness in the Izzet deck, right? Like there are things that it just does not deal well with. And so the Moto metagame was successfully tackling those as would come up. People would put in the time and challenge would come around and someone would say, oh, well, the deck is just really soft to shoulder. So any shoulder deck, right, they can't beat 5 toughness creatures, especially threats that are really punishing for, trying to dig to answers. So Shoulderids and like skirmish rhinos, and it was a whole strategy won the challenge. Or like the Reanimator deck won I think it was one of the showcase events, where it was like, okay, this is a weakness of the Prowess deck. It's not really configured to beat some of these threats or to handle this kind of game plan. And so that worked a couple of times. But I think that the Izzet Prowess players who were really preparing for their RC in Europe, they put in a lot of time to figure out how they could continue to optimize their deck after seeing these new pressures come in, right? How do I adapt to beat, Reanimator? How many more graveyard hate spells can I play? How am I going to beat, how am I going to beat 5 toughness creatures? I need to make sure I have answers. Is Into the Flood Mug going to be good enough? Like these were kind of questions. And over the weekend, what we saw is that I think that not so many people playing decks that weren't Izzet were on that same level of adapting their strategy to live in this world dominated by the presence of Izzet. Like all the decks that we're talking about that were or that I just mentioned that were successful in spite of Izzet, were decks targeting weaknesses in Izzet, right? If you just came playing a deck that was good right before Tarkir came out, you were a couple of weeks behind because you weren't maybe acknowledging the strength in Izzet. And now I think moving out of this weekend, right, like the cat's out of the bag in a way. And like you said, Mason, that means that Izzet's putting more pressure on itself to adapt to what it knows its weaknesses are. And we've had this huge dump of deck lists of people who also tried to solve the problem to work through to try to refine that.
What is really interesting to me is exactly what you said about kind of there were beliefs, right, about the format. And I mentioned at the beginning, like I thought this was like a multi-deck format. Like there were tons of decks that were reasonable choices going into this weekend. There were 5 decks with a winning with above 50 win percentage at the RC, just for example, and that's kind of low for like a lot of formats that we've looked at recently. Now, what I'll say is there were a lot of decks within 3% of that. But it goes to show that like maybe the cream rises. Some of the decks that we talked about. I think that there was a text for my event this weekend where we were doing a team event where we had a legacy player, modern player, and a standard player. And because I wasn't going to Minneapolis, I decided not to play standard, which I know might surprise some people. Oh my gosh, Spencer decided to play modern. What? But our teammate was going to Minneapolis. I wanted him in the standard seed. I actually told him he needed to play it, and he came to me with 2 decks, and they were mono red and this blue black control deck. And I thought to myself, listen, I'm going to tell him what I think, which is that the blue black control deck is cool, but I think that you will have a problem with with the card Corey Steel Cutter, and but I also think that this is a cash event. If he needs to get this deck off of his chest from Minneapolis, I'm going to let him do it. Turns out he won, I think, every round he didn't play against Corey Steelcutter. Every single one. And then lost every round that he played against Corey Steelcutter. And I think that, there was a couple of weeks ago, Mason, you had mentioned kind of this, this thing where, I think it was about Zur, where it was like, yeah, you might have a good matchup against Domain when they don't draw Zur, but when they do draw Zur, you always lose. So do you really have a good matchup against the deck? And if that is the case, if you literally can't beat the card Corey Steelcutter, should you be playing your deck? Like, is that a valid strategy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would kind of answer no, especially with like this good of a weekend. Maybe Corey Steelcutter does pretty bad this weekend, right? But players still like it. Yeah, you can maybe have a conversation about something like that. But typically, I think if a card's this popular, this played, and recognized as this strong, especially when there's low sample size overall, people are not going to sway too much unless things kind of have overwhelmingly positive, and it does make me want to move away. I think it's also, as a side note, we talked about 5 decks having over 50% win rate. Of note, Azorius Omniscience had a 51.1, but if you separate the two builds, one had a 53.5, which would actually put it at the third highest placement. That is the one with only 1 or less invasions of Arcodius playing the Saga. And then it had 47.7 if you played more than one of that card, according to Frank Karsten. He had a follow-up tweet about that too. So I did want to highlight that as well. Like, the data is also a little weird based on that, but also you're breaking up the sample size a good bit when you mix those two. And I think, when you have problematic matchups against stuff like that or against archetypes, you need to like think about those sort of things too. And like, how different does it play if my opponent has to commit this 5 mana card to maybe, this to like make it all work afterwards versus this 2 mana card, or like getting clunked with 5 cards in hand, 5 mana cards in hand.
Changing 2 cards in a deck couldn't possibly change the data that much. Come on.
Changing 3 cards. That's why.
Oh, sorry, my bad. My bad.
Yeah, that's a 50% increase from what we last talked about.
Oh my gosh. So sorry. I will not get on my tirade. I'm kind of curious. One thing that I wanted to note about what Mason just said too, though, is because we did see a quote drop off in Pixie, but it is one of the decks that did have an above 50% win percentage at the RC specifically. Do you have any thoughts on that, Mason?
No, I think Pixie is like a pretty powerful thing. I think it does sort of like have some issues in the Corey Cutter matchup. People talk about like how Oculus and Pixie's mana looks very similar. And, a lot of times people mention, well, Pixie's mana base is part of what makes it bad against red. And that's because it's very pip intensive, right? Your pain lands end up doing a lot of damage to you. And I think that sort of stuff makes it pretty hard to do well. And, it really, the Orzhov Pixie deck is the one that kind of shined the hardest, that is sort of main decking these temporary lockdowns, having this big end game against players. So,
I'm sorry. I did misspeak there. You're right.
Yeah, so like as for Pixie, did not have a great weekend. It didn't have a bad weekend, it ended up with 48.3%. But it only has a couple really good matchups. And to its credit, it looks like players did come prepared for like the aggro matchup, having a slightly favored matchup versus mono red. It says 58%, but it's only 16 matches difference there. So I don't know, it's a good deck. And in the Orzhov Pixie deck's a deck that I get asked a lot about in coaching. I'm curious if y'all have any thoughts, but it's one of the decks that I picked up and played pretty quickly when I saw it, because it's kind of like a thing that I really enjoy playing, like low resource games, has some like cute little combo-y kill to it, using the word combo very generously here, and like is kind of just full of cards that are pretty good. But I do think it sort of falls under the bar, just because while it is kind of nice, it kind of does end up in a lot of spots where it forces both players to be top decking, and then I think a lot of the best decks top deck very well, and so it makes it really hard for it to be a deck that I would suggest someone to play.
Yeah, I think that Orzhov Pixie, especially, like, you look at Esper Pixie, and where it's really has excelled previously is the ability to just like, okay, I'm going to run you out of threats and run you out of cards and material, and then like claw ahead with talent, and with this talent big enough. The concession that Orzhov Pixie makes is saying, I can't afford to try to play for that game. I need to play these lockdowns, and being able to bounce those and recast those, that's going to be a bit of my kind of grind in some of those same synergistic things going on with Kieran and with Pixie and Hopeless Nightmare and Nowhere to Run. Like, this is the engine, this is the core of my early game interaction suite, and Lockdown is my answer to Corey Steelcutter. Like, that is the most problematic card, especially as a deck that's trying to one-for-one the opponent and then like have creatures that continue to have the stream of answers. But when Corey Steelcutter is generating an additional threat for no additional mana every turn after it's cast, and you're trying to catch up by playing Grim Bauble or by playing Nowhere to Run, and you're actually answering the Steelcutter, the game just runs away from you. So, like, it makes sense to me why in this world where Izzet did so well, the Orzhov decks also did really well, because they're playing a game plan that at its core is good against some of these more low to the ground decks, and decks that are playing by these rules of engagement of saying, okay, what really matters is the early game, because it still has, you know, all of the rebuying and making the most out of all the spells it has in its opening hand to make sure it doesn't flood out so much in the early game. But when you start to get to the later game, it really does feel the loss there of the blue cards, and there's not a way to have it both ways. So you know, it's like with Corey Steelcutter changing the dynamic of the format, you know, nothing really changed about Esper Pixie except for the fact that it no longer has a good matchup against the best aggro deck, where before kind of the reason to play the deck was that you had a good matchup against Gruul and against the mice decks, which I think it still does. It's just the Steelcutter card it has changed the paradigm of that so strongly that until they can find a way to work in answers to the card Corey Steelcutter, it's going to be a really hard proposition to make that better than playing the Orzhov deck.
All right, I'm going to throw one in here. You know, just throw a wrench really quick. Because our Discord will get mad if I don't. Demons! Okay, so for those who don't know, if you played on Arena before this event, you ran into mono black demons a lot. Regardless of whether you're playing events or ladder or whatever, you ran into it a lot. You're always going to run into mono black a lot. But I'm curious. This deck actually had pretty good results for how few people played it. Does it have a spot in the metagame? Abe, who is the demon's lover?
I mean, I think that, like I said, so the one of the core weaknesses of the Izzet deck is that it struggles to beat large creatures, and especially ones that are presenting a quick clock and answers, right? You're playing Gix's Command, a card that kind of brought Dimir mid-range back to the forefront of the metagame. You get to play, you know, along with cards like Preacher, right? You have access to a lot of good cards that are structurally good against the cards and the interactive spells in Prowess. That's a plus. Downside, your deck is kind of one-dimensional and is going to suffer from the mid-range problem in a world where you're going to get run over by Izzet Prowess decks, and sometimes they're going to line up their tempo-y answers to what you're doing, and sometimes you're not going to play against those Prowess decks, and your deck is going to feel a bit outclassed. At least that's my experience playing against it. So, you know, I think that, and I've said this a lot over my time making Magic content. I think I've said a lot on this show. I know I said a lot when I was writing for Star City, but like when you look into the second tier of decks, so the decks that are like doing well and you're like, why is this even a thing we're talking about and doing? Like, there's always a grain of truth there of what is quality in there. Like, what is the part of that deck that's making it win and what's successful, and why people are playing it, right? There's always a reason for it. It's not just because they like sitting demons. A lesson I learned at the RC in DC. There's a real valid reason in the metagame why this deck was winning. But you have to kind of figure out what that is. If the deck doesn't really feel like it's up to snuff against the breadth of the format, kind of figuring out what the good pieces of that are. And I think it kind of is probably a better mix than like Golgari has. Golgari being one of the worst performing decks that got named as far as the data went from this weekend. But, you know, being able to play some amount of these Haymaker threats and and a little bit of card advantage and a lot of ways to disrupt the hand and hopefully multiple discard spells to try to get Steel Cutter. This all makes sense to me as to how it has a plan.
Yes.
But I don't think it's going to stay this way and continue to
Hold on. I want to be really, really clear on what you just said. Because Dimir has a horrible Izzet matchup. As it should, as it has no way to answer Steel Cutter. And so you might think, okay, well, if I play Golgari, then I have that answer and I'm in a similar space. Turns out, that's not what you need to do. If you... I'm just going to say this to listener because there's so many of you that are listening that are going to be Golgari or Dimir. What's the kid saying these days, Mason? Pilled? Yeah, you're going to be mid-range pilled. And if you're going to play that style of deck, I actually do believe... Just play this one. I don't think you should play it, but if you're gonna do it, just play this one.
Well, why are you not playing Izzet, Prowess, or just Oculus? They're both better mid-range.
Because they're gonna gonna play a black mid-range deck, and you can't stop them.
Sure. I mean, I would just kind of, if you're listening to this and you think that, I would just challenge you to just think about how the Izzet Prowess games play out versus decks like Dimir.
Winning, Mason.
Right. I'm trying to, it's fine.
No, go ahead.
No, it's good. We can move on.
I think that there's some amount of the time where somebody's just going to play a deck, a style of deck that they are comfortable with. And we have to accept that as listeners, even, or as hosts, even in times where we're like, hey, this is not the time to do that. And
I think, I just think both the decks I mentioned play better mid-range games than the decks that you're talking about. And I think it's just important to contextualize that for them.
No,
I think people are bad at realizing that. That's what I was trying to say.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I'm saying that they don't play black.
Right. Well, I'm not anyone who's picking a deck based off feel and not power level considerations or winning are not the people I'm speaking to. If you want to play a deck because you like a deck that is good, that is okay. I'm never going to judge you for that or whatever. It's the people who are I'm trying to min-max my... Well, yeah, but I think there are people who are wanting to min-max winning who are going to play things like Dimir,
Oh, well, let's talk about Dimir really quick because it was the story of the RC if you watched it. And it was the point that I wanted to make next anyway, which is, this deck did pretty well this tournament.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Dimir had a lot going for it this tournament. And I think that it could have a lot going for it in the next tournament. But I think that the issue that Dimir will have is that, unlike what Abe said, its game plan is not singular as a mid-range deck. And it also struggles against the best deck, which I think its play percentage could go up, possibly. There's only so many things that you can do to fight Corey Steel Cutter with Dimir cards. Whereas you only have to fight a plan if you're a singular style deck with better mana. So I think that Dimir did well at this event because there were really cool Dimir decks that were doing vastly different things. But I also think the Dimir decks were often 15 cards different from each other, which tells me that this was a pilot thing and not a archetype thing.
I think also it's worth noting that the places where Dimir was picking up its wins was against the non-Izzet Prowess top decks in the format. And I think also it had the tools to still have not a great, it had a 40% win rate against Izzet Prowess. But it's still a matchup that was within reach. A lot of them played cards to try to nab opening hand Steel Cutters. between duresses and intimidation tactics. Hix's Command is a card that like absolutely has the capability to swing games. Being able to leave up a lot of mana and play very reactively really shuts off Slick Shot show-off's potency. So there are a lot of things that play into like on the micro scale of that, like make it so it's not completely out of that matchup, and it still gets the benefit of being strong against a broad field. I would be very surprised if it had a good weekend this weekend. I think it is a terrible deck to take into a metagame that is going to be moving very rapidly towards a centerpiece that is not one it's already like vapor announced. You're not going to be able to overnight in 1 week craft a Dimir 75 that's going to be good against your bad matchup when your bad matchup is structurally bad and you don't really have good answers to Corey Steelcutter. And more people who are playing decks you are feeding wins off of are going to start just jumping ship or shifting down towards the space that you're unfavored in. And I think we already saw this happen last time, right? We saw this with when Pixie started to win a lot. Like the deck just stopped performing. It was like one of the best decks in Standard, and then like within a month, it was nowhere. And I could see that happening to it all over again.
Yeah, I think also we keep mentioning the card Corey Steelcutter, but it also just struggles with talent. You know, like the way it plays the games in this matchup is just like, okay, I'm gonna stop a couple things and stick, you know, a Preacher or a Kaito, you know, and then I'm gonna kind of play that like, you know, protect the queen style game plan. And that doesn't kill very quickly, right? Unless you have your actual best draws. And in a lot of coaching sessions, you know, doing VOD review people, there's just been a lot of like, yeah, I floated out a bit, hit my 6th land and leveled up my talent along the way. And I just started making otters and took over. And that's not even counting, you know, these decks all play Ral, the Otter Viceroy in the sideboard, whatever its name actually is. And that card's just really strong against what you're doing too, because it's like your cards have low base power, right? So you can't really kill it, and it presents a chump blocker every turn, while also like being able to move through the deck. And there's lots of times you're flooding out, you're destroying through cards. Maybe you hit a cantrip or two, you know, and like your Ral lives because, you know, they're attacking it with a Preacher that Schism or a small Spyglass Siren, you know, and that stuff's just really hard to beat. So it's not, I think if it was just Corey Steelcutter, you know, and that was like the only thing that was a problem, then maybe I could understand where people are coming from. But I think there's a lot of issues you have. And this same dynamic we're talking about translates to a lot of the other decks, you know, like this is one of the big strengths of this Izzet deck is, you know, its 1-drop curve out creature is also its, you know, late game card advantage, I won the game button. And that's just really strong. You know, imagine if Goblin Guide just in the graveyard said, you know, flashback deal 5, you know, for like 6 mana. It would just be a much better card. And like that's sort of like what this card is. You would probably play, you know, a 1/1 or whatever that triggers prowess for other things. And like we would just play talent maybe in a lot of worlds if it just had the first mode. Like level up the first time. And it just has this extra mode that comes up a lot now. I think people aren't quite used to because of how much the card has been about this town. You know, that dynamic of the card has been a rare occurrence versus a real game plan. And I think that's huge when thinking about like, you know, your matchups versus decks like this. And like same thing with Jeskai Control, you know, and just control decks in general. You have to fight through this card that produces multiple bodies and multiple issues. And there's more than one and they're different types. You know, the fact that it's artifacts and enchantments, it just means you're stretched.
No, I love that because it actually, the blue-black cards are very good. And
yeah, they're not bad.
And what happens is, like, because the blue-black cards are very good, it does tend to be like, okay, well, fine. How do I fight the blue-black cards? Well, look, I'm going to play enchantments and artifacts, and, like, you cannot do a lot now. And I really like that you mentioned Ral Cackling Wit because scoreboard, I did say that this card would see play. But, like, also, there was a moment on coverage this weekend where they were talking about the Izzet decks playing Sunspire Links. And I think it was Andre Managuchi was like, just play Ral. Like, it's gonna take over the game the same way. and you're not going to do yourself damage. You're not going to have to deal with removal because the decks that you're boarding in against can't kill it, and they're already planned for Sunfire Links. And that's a thing that Abe just said of like, what can I do to adapt for the people that are now prepared for Izzet? And it's like, okay, well, let me give you another hard to deal with threat that's not a creature that I was boarding in against you to change this. And I think that what I learned this weekend was 3 things. And I want to get into this. 1, the decks that played Spell Pierce overperformed. Spell Pierce turns out to be a very important card in this format. I think that Spell Pierce, at the rate it was played, might have been... I don't have the data to back this up. This is all anecdotal, but it might have been the best performing card.
Spire Bluff Canal was.
Ooh, I like that. Thank you, Mason. That's a good one. I like that you get to talk about lands, but I don't. But I do think the Spell Pierce was like... It was crazy. Like, the decks that played, it even won. Like, you looked at a deck that did well in both the Super and that, and if you played Spell Pierce in your Dimir deck, in your Izzet deck, in your wherever you were, Spell Pierce is back on the map. Abe, how do you feel about
that? Yeah, I mean, I think that, like I said at the top, it really just speaks to a condensation of the format down to the early turns of the game. Where Spell Pierce shines the most is where it's either stopping a spell that's stabilizing the game from happening, or just being a 1-mana counter spell, right? A 1-mana negate in those pivotal early development turns. And I think, not to circle too far back here, but I think that, you know, Mason, and you speaking about the weakness of Dimir, you kind of hit the nail on the head as to why Demons is kind of winning in the way that it is, or has a draw to in the way that it is, right? The games need to end quickly. You need to end the games quickly. If you are playing Izzet Prowess, you need to end the games quickly. If you're playing, you know, Azorius Omniscience, you need to be able to end the games quickly. That's why I think that having the 5-mana, you know, wish battle was such a detriment to those decks. I think people playing the up to the minute lists, really adapting to the way the deck is built and playing a stronger win condition, it makes sense why those decks performed better and those players did, because they're just playing by the rules of the format better. And, you know, when you look at ways to win the game quickly, Archfiend of the Dross, you know, that thing's never having all the counters come off of it. And it's going to cost your opponent life points to get through, and it's not going to die to a lot of the things people are playing to push through high toughness blockers. And then, you know, yeah, like the games, like you said, Spencer, they're super condensed. The Spell Pierce is definitely a card that I think gives an additional draw to Izzet in terms of making it one of, if not the best decks in the format. Definitely like this week consensus best deck, but gives it that staying power is that a lot of the ways to fight it are naturally weak to Spell Pierce, and a lot of the speed of that deck allows it to consistently be enacting its game plan and leverage Spell Pierce as a way to deal a lot of damage. It can't play a high number of them because it has to have a corrected game plan, but even, you know, 1 to 3 copies in the 75 make a huge difference when that Spell Pierce, you know, answers your opponent's lockdown they need to cast on turn 3 when they're on the draw, for example. Right? There's just a lot of utility in that card, and in general just a lot of, you know, push against the format. And I think that the more that you think about, like, if you're looking into Minneapolis and you're like, how am I going to adapt? Thinking about what is it, no pun intended, but what is it in the Prowess deck that I am looking to exploit, or what play patterns in the Prowess deck am I looking to leverage if I'm playing it? Right, if I'm playing it, how am I leaning into what I do best, and how am I covering myself to some of these exploitable angles? And if I'm playing against it, how am I trying to exploit it? Because you need to pick something. You have to be very intentional in targeting the deck. And I think I'd be incredibly surprised if it was not the number 1 most played deck in the tournament by a pretty wide margin.
Mason, we've talked all about this stuff, and you probably talked a lot about what it is, but like, where are you at today?
Yeah, I mean, if I was playing this weekend, I'm not going to Minneapolis, but I would be playing the Corey Steelcutter deck. I think there's a lot of different ways to go into the specifics of your deck, a lot of room for it to kind of adapt to what's going on and have a bunch of different game plans, and all of it's very proactive and strong, and just a big believer in the deck. So yeah, that's where I would be.
Abe? You are going.
Yeah, I would be playing. I'd be playing Blue Red Prowess. I would.
Wait, you said.
I have
what
not.
did you say?
I'd be playing Prowess.
Oh, I think you said Boros. I was like, I think you said.
I play Boros Prowess. You know,
that's what I heard, and I was like,
I think Lift of Answers, Shield Blessing, or whatever is best. No, I play Izzet, and I think that I would, because I'm not gonna be playing Minneapolis, which is too hard to fit in my schedule, even though it's qualified.
Oh, okay.
I'll be playing Hartford, but I would be looking into. I think Drake Hatcher is a great call for this weekend, because a big weakness in the Izzet deck is that all of its removal are Burst Lightnings and Shocks and into the Flood Maw. So something that is cheap with high toughness that presents a clock. I think it also leans into the same things that make Corey Steel Cutter really good, where it's able to turn 2 spells into an additional body to let you continue to snowball your advantage. All of that's really appealing. And then I would look into playing Fiery Annihilations in the sideboard as kind of a way to condense answers to Steel Cutters in the mirror, and also having answers to some of the other ways I think people will pivot to try to beat you, not only to kill Inoculus, so you can kind of justify it in that realm, but also like Shieldred and other non-blue or white 5 toughness creatures.
Yeah, as of today, the time of recording, I would play a Marauding Mako Jeskai Oculus deck. I think that deck is very good. I think that it has game against a lot of the format, and I think that its bad matchup, as it has said, will literally disappear. I think that there's no chance that anyone there's not a chance, but there's a low chance that like Dimir suddenly is going to continue to try to knock this deck out of top 8s and out of these positions. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe people are just that black card pilled. But before we go, I want to know, do you guys like this format, Mason?
No.
Ooh, interesting.
The games are fun enough, but I don't find it particularly interesting. I don't think there's a lot of great deck diversity. It's Magic, so it's not like the games are unfun.
It's still good.
Yeah, but it's pretty low on my list of things to play. It's probably of the formats I actually engage in, it's the bottom of it, and the work really feels like work right now.
What about you, Abe?
I think that the incentives that Corey Steelcutter being the best threat in the format kind of put on the format lead to a lot of compounding onto already what was a bit of a fear of mine about the format, where the red cards were just the best, and now it's the next best card is a red card that is supported by all of the other good card draw. So yeah, I'm kind of in line with Mason. I don't hate it. I've been playing it a good bit to prepare and make sure I'm in the know, because of the upcoming RCs and PT. But yeah, I think that I would enjoy the format more if the games were a bit slower and the best card were not a 2-mana card that dictates the pace of the game. I feel like I'm kind of playing a very Arclight Phoenix-y format, which makes sense because the best deck is just a bunch of cantrips and power threats.
And I like the format before Dragonstorm too. Just to I don't, if you listeners remember this, but we talked about going to the VNR. You asked me, and I was like, oh, I think we're pretty far from that. I don't think I'm not trying to say we're close to bans. I do think it's been a pretty big shift.
I think that my opinion is that when a card sees play in every single format, it might be problematic. And the thing is Corey Steel. I don't know if you guys have. I know you guys have. Corey Steelcutter is very fun to play with. It's actually extremely fun to play with, and it also rewards very good gameplay and sequencing very well. So it also rewards things that I like Magic to reward. But it also means that when the other side is doing things wrong, that the games are not close. Like, I had multiple times this weekend where somebody killed something other than my Quarry Steel Cutter and lost the next turn. And I don't know that it was ever clear to them that that was the card killing them, but I was in Modern and that was happening. So I like this format because I do think that there are a lot of fun and interesting decks. I also, there's very few standard formats that I don't like, especially the ones this big. Like, if somebody showed up and did well with like Temur Tear or I mean, Jeskai Control, we didn't talk a lot about today, but like that deck's really interesting. Like, I would not be surprised by a lot of these decks doing well, and I do think that is interesting and fun. So I enjoy this format, but I think that it will be easy to get sick of if this doesn't change.
Yeah, I think it has, a pretty constant recurring issue, which is like if there was low pressure to play the best thing and the incentives were more, like, hey, it doesn't really matter if you win or lose that much outside of pride or, like the cash prize, whatever. I think we would see a much more diverse format. The same way you see this happen with like Pioneers, like my go-to example right now. Every time there's not an RC for Pioneer, everyone talks about Pioneer is so fun. There's so many decks, and then it comes time for the RC.
That says that. Do you actually know people that think Pioneer's fun right now?
Yeah, definitely.
My entire community thinks that it's the most trash format of all time. Like they actually. I'll just say,
right,
I think all of Utah sold their Pioneer decks.
Okay, but but I'm not talking about right now. I'm talking like on a big long time frame. This happens all the time, right? There's not pressure on the format. Legacy is a great example of this. There's not pressure on the format. Look, all these different things we can do. Eternal Weekend comes by, or it comes time to qualify for the Pro Tour via the Magic Online Supers. What happens? Turns out there's some issues. You know what I mean? Yeah. And what I'm mostly saying is I feel like if I didn't feel pressured to be playing this format to maximize for winning above all else, I think I would have a lot more fun. Mm-hmm. But I feel that's not the case. I feel, that this format kind of has that issue. Now, that's an issue I think lots of formats have. It's not like this is something specific. I'm more saying this feels like a common thing that happens to Magic formats, and it's like part of the buy-in to playing is that sometimes this occurs. And that's not the end of the world. When I play for fun, like if I play FNM, I have like a pretty good time playing, like some brew or some fun deck or something like that, playing against those other things. That's really fun. I play on the ladder or an event. That's like fun. But when I have to play to compete and practice and that sort of stuff, it becomes a little less fun in a way that is not true every time this comes around, but does happen fairly regularly. Like I would say once every couple of years this occurs.
Yeah, but you wanted to say something.
Oh, I was just gonna kind of. I mean, I agree with what Mason's saying. I also think just like my biggest and only gripe about Steel Cutter is that it feels like the only thing that competes with it on rate for generating that kind of advantage is itself, which just inherently makes the gameplay about, like you said, Spencer, big card pool standard formats are a lot of fun because you have a lot of options. But the second that a lot of options start getting validated, which I feel like I fear. And now listen, a lot of things could happen. I think it is a huge card pool. And, I think that what we saw in the European RC is really a reflection of the reality of the format more so than, the finality of the format, right? Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people were playing things that were weeks behind. But this is kind of more of what Magic Online has been telling us through iteration the format is going to look like, and there's time for the next to catch up. But if it stays this way, then it's kind of
Hold on.
It's just kind. It just kind of gets very samey.
The tournament's in like the time of recording in 4 days. There's
no
time.
I'm speaking of the format as a whole.
Oh, okay.
And its life cycle.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Like if you're playing the format this weekend, definitely I'd play Izzet. But I'm saying like there's time for things, for the hammers to fall, for things to shift over themselves, for people to find ways to compete and different angles to attack. But I fear if it becomes a rock, paper, scissors with a few very important cards, a few pillars that you have to engage in order to compete in the format.
Right. That's not what big formats are about, right?
Right, and because it just makes the format feel small. That's kind of my biggest fear right now, is the format's going to feel small. I will say, next time there's a Pioneer season, though, this is free advice. Play Arclight Phoenix. Or Steel Cutter in it.
Is that free advice that feels like 3-year-old
free advice? We can get him this time.
Yeah.
We can get him this time.
Yeah, where Corey Steel Cutter's going to do it.
After Corey Steel Cutter gets banned in Pioneer, then you have to keep playing it with Treasure Cruises and be like, this is a problem.
Have you played Glacial Dragonaut in Pioneer yet?
I don't want to play it in Standard.
I've got goals. I've got things to do. I just know what I'm playing when it comes around.
I was just joking that I don't like that card that much, and I'm sure it's really good at Phoenix. But yeah, no, I just want to say something too, that like, I think Abe just hit a really good thing, that like it's still growing, it's still developing. I think there's a lot of people who locked in stuff, like you said, a couple weeks ago. They weren't sure, they weren't going to get much more data, and they'd rather be well practiced than on the cutting edge. I think is the thing that happened. So I'm really curious to see how things go. This is just the first American RC. There's still the Canadian RC, our other RC, the APAC RC. There's a lot that's going to happen. And our plan, as a little inside scoop, is we're going to be covering Standard for the next 4 weeks. We are going to be kind of bringing you, continuous Standard. If it ends up being a bad decision to do that, hopefully it won't be. But, we'll pivot. But our current plan is just Standard next couple of weeks. No big, learning episodes in that classical sense, much more staying on top of things. And I'm hopeful that, in a week from now, I'm having to be like my beat. I sort of missed this sort of stuff, et cetera, et cetera. But, this doesn't just mean you roll over or whatever. There's still a lot to, get played on the margins. And I'm excited to see sort of what comes out of this weekend. Because lots of times there are moments where something feels like this, and then people do figure out one or two big things, and then that has huge implications on the rest of the format. Even just another deck that pops up that's maybe pretty good could have effects that make Izzet, maybe less represented, or maybe just also make the games way more fun. Having different textured games is fun. So, yeah, I'm excited for the future.
If you want to support the show, head on to patreon.com/ccmtg. Every patron gets a shout out. No shout outs this week. There's also no questions this week. This is first in a long time. This is my fault. I usually ask every week. I haven't been asking lately because we've just had questions naturally rolling in on the Discord. But if you want to ask a question, an example of one, it doesn't have to be Magic. And this is the whole thing, Mason. Who would win? 1 gorilla or 100 human men?
I would 1v1 the gorilla, so I don't even know why I need the 99 people, except to spread my tail.
Dude, you can't say this and then also be the guy that said that, like, aren't you the guy that was like, didn't you make like a spreadsheet or something about like the rat versus humans?
He did a whole tier list on everything he thought he could fight one-on-one. And I believe I don't remember where the gorilla fell, but I do believe that Mason thinks that he would win.
Yeah,
you think he would beat a silverback gorilla in hand-to-hand combat?
Oh, easily. It's not even a question. I put it on a tier list 2 years ago.
All right, Abe.
If the 100 individuals do not include Mason Esports Clark,
Smart man.
Hold on.
Smart
I
man.
gotta laugh at that.
Smart man. You take me over Mike Tyson any day, buddy. I got you.
Okay.
I'm just saying, I don't think Logan Paul can do it.
Mm-hmm.
I think 100 Logan Pauls couldn't do it.
Here's my.
I'm Team Gorilla, and I put the burden on Mason to prove me wrong. I never want Mason to meet a gorilla in hand-to-hand, one-on-one combat because the world's not ready for what that will entail, be it the loss of Mason Clark or Mason Clark getting convicted for attacking an endangered species.
I mean, the zookeeper will just shoot Mason Clark, right? Anyway, I
I found the tier list I made.
Oh,
Turns out if you Google my name plus
I knew-
animal
you have
fighting
to
tier
tweet
list,
it,
you can find it.
you're gonna
instantly.
just tweet it as
gonna-
soon as the
I'm gonna
episode's
retweet
Just
over.
it.
we're just, it's reruns on Magic Twitter, everyone, and it's all our fault.
Here's the thing. I have waffled on this one. The doors versus wheels thing, super easy. The eyes versus leg thing, super easy. This one's actually kind of hard. Like, this one's the first one that I was like, wow, 100 humans? And then I saw the grip strength of a gorilla and the bone strength of a gorilla. And I was like, no chance. 100 humans will not beat a gorilla.
My actual answer is it matters a lot.
It's
I think that
hand-to-hand combat. You have no weapons.
No. That is not the part that matters to me. The part that matters to me is what is the incentive for the 100 people? I think if I threaten, like, for example, let's say I was doing this like a Bond villain. If I'm going to kill the families and loved ones of the 100 people, I think that is a big enough incentive. They have a realistic shot at winning because people will sacrifice themselves to the cause. Because you need to blind the gorilla. We need to use about half the people for that. And then the other half need to wear it down. And eventually it will tire out. That's how you win.
So let's pretend. Dude, you can't go too far into this. But, like, legitimately, like, I was Team Humans until yesterday. When I looked up a silverback gorilla's actually there was a lot of reasons, but just the bone strength, you will not break its bone. 100 humans will not break a bone of a gorilla. That's the first thing. The grip strength of the gorilla, every human it grabs, their bone is breaking. Every single one.
That's why we need the fodder.
So I agree that you need the fodder. I don't know if you have the fodder. Like,
there's an old proverb you might have heard, Spencer. It goes, ape together strong.
Ape together strong. So here's the other plan. And I'm going to say this and we're going to move on.
Yeah.
This is how I would win. All right. So I just want everyone to understand.
Are you the conductor?
Just trust. Just let me speak my truth. Okay. It's going to take 30 seconds. So I'm going to get the other 99 people to go in the corner and sort of huddle up, figure out how to survive for a while. I'm going to seduce the gorilla, make it fall in love with me, and then when it's asleep, that's when I'm going to go for it. And that's what's going to happen.
Why is it sleeping if it's seduced? Wouldn't it?
Well, because I'm on the long term. I'm thinking we're here for weeks because there's no timeline. That's how I'm going to win. So the gorilla's going to fall in love with me.
You think the gorilla is here for the long term for that type of interaction?
I think I turn my charm on and the gorilla can't resist, and now
there has to be an angle wherein you and this is the only way I can conceive 100 normal humans winning, is that they're able to gain control of all of the relevant resources for survival and fatigue the gorilla out.
Yeah.
You put it in the resource chokehold.
Oh, you
gather all of the food in your arena.
Okay.
You control all of the water and you habitat it out until then it fights you and you have to win at that point.
Are we in a contained space? I mean, I guess we have to be.
It all depends,
Yeah.
Like what is it the gladiator dome or is it a biome? These are all things that matter to the question.
Can I send the gorilla to space?
Yeah.
We don't have the resources to get the gorilla to space. That's not.
Says who?
Yeah, what if I recreate stuff like Dr.
You can check out our sponsors. Our first is Mana Traders. Use the code CCMTG3. I just updated it today. We had a long conversation with people actually at the Human this weekend about what do you use different Magic platforms for? And what was really interesting is Mana Traders offers you the ability to do something that nothing else does. Where you just get to play Magic Online. And I think that it was interesting to hear people's opinions who play both about where the better players are, where the different incentives are, and things like that, and how they match different things. But if you are looking to really up your game, get into challenges, get into playing Magic more competitively, Mana Traders is the way to do that. Use that code. It helps out a ton. Additionally, our other sponsor is Untap.gg. And I learned that you actually get replays on your premium account, just like every other premium account. I did not know this before 2 weeks ago, Abe, where you actually can see your games, watch them for free. You don't have to record them, which I've been telling people in coaching for way too long. No, you just get a premium account. You just get free replays, or not free, but you're paying for the thing. But like you get them. Like you can watch your games, show them people, talk with your coach, talk with everybody. It's really cool. I actually did that this week when I talked about the Jeskai Oculus deck. So. And then don't forget to check out the swag store. Abe, I have a mug for you. Your shirt never came in. I emailed them. They said they sent it to you, which isn't true. So maybe we're going to change swag stores. But I actually have a question for the listener. Because a lot of you have bought recently. Did you get your product? Because I only got half of Abe's product, and I want to know. So let us know. Let's talk about always improving. I'm going to go first. I got to play matches that mattered this weekend, and it was really important to me. It's something that I think I talked about on the podcast for a couple of months about how I wanted to do this more. And so when building a team for this team event, I said, hey, I'm team no splits going in. Like, I just want every match to matter more. I think it's really important. I want that. And so we got to the point where one of my teammates, former coach of the show, Matt Kling, was like, hey, do you think we'll be done by X time? And I was like, not if we no split. Like, there's no way that happens. There were a lot of unintentional draws in Legacy, by the way. And at the end of the event, I felt bad. Like, it was so late. I was like, dude, if you want to go with your Halo team, like, I'll just split. Like, it's good. And both my teammates were like, no, we agreed with you that we were no splits. You're playing these matches, Spencer. And it was really interesting because it dialed me up to 10. Like, I was like, oh, we're going for it. Like, we're going to win this event. And I played really good Magic in those rounds. I didn't get to finish my finals match, but we did make it to the finals, and I easily 2-0'd my semifinals opponent because it was top 4 cut, and I just turning the switch. I think Mason has talked about this like maybe 3 times in the last 2 months. But like turning the switch of like, okay, if you guys are gonna hold me to my own request, I'm gonna do it. It was really nice and it really enjoyable. And I don't have anything other than like make Magic matter to you. Like, make the matches matter. Because when you get to an RC, when you get to the elimination rounds, when you get to the whatever it is, like, it's so much more fun. And also, if you've been in that experience a lot, it's so much easier if you have done it. Mason, I assume you have something to say about this, but maybe you don't.
No, I don't.
All right. Abe?
It's fun.
I'm sorry that you lost the finals.
Dude, it was so hard too. Can I go off?
You got a 30 seconds
Okay.
Johns.
They were so happy. Like, they were like, we didn't do it. Like, we still got the prices we got with the split and all this stuff. I was like, I hate losing $200 on a match. Like, I wanted to win so bad. And I didn't even get to finish my match. And it's funny because, like, there were a lot of things that I could have done that probably would have put us in a better position. But I loved it, man. Like, I love playing for that type of thing. Like, make your matches matter.
I do like your teammates were like, no, we're committed. We're not splitting.
I actually told them they weren't allowed to join the team unless they agreed to no splits. And then somebody asked us when we would be done. And I was like, well, I guess we could be done, but like I don't want to. And they're like, no, you are the one that said we weren't allowed to. We're gonna do it. And I was like, all right, well then I'm gonna win my match. Like, let's go.
Yeah, I love that.
Abe, what about you?
Yeah, so my losing improvement moment this week came from actually from a mistake I made during the standard challenge on Sunday. I had been playing Esper Pixie because it's a deck that kind of in my blind spot of where I was not playing a lot of standard to focus on modern and focus on things going on at work. My time was really limited, so I'm like kind of catching up on the format, playing a lot of decks that really matter. And something that I had to pretty quickly stop and catch myself on was that I was not thinking about. I was like thinking about my games with a lot of preconceived notions. I like had this idea of how Pixie worked. I was kind of playing with that in mind heuristically, but I was not like looking at the games as games so much as I was kind of going through the motions of playing them. And it's wound up costing me a game in round 2. I went on to lose game 3 of that, or it was round 3. I went on to lose game 3 of that match. And at the end of it, I just like reflected. I was like, why is it that I didn't just think about the turn cycle? It was like it was a very simple thing. I could have just not blocked, and my opponent was just dead on the backswing. It was a very obvious win. If I was thinking about trying to win the game, and I realized that not only was it because of my like my idea of like how I was going to win that game in a large sense and not choosing to update that, but then why did I not choose to update that? And why was I not engaging with it in the way that I was going to be thinking about it, at the best capacity? And so I like eliminated a lot of the distractions that I had going on because I was playing at my computer, and I was like, okay, well let me focus in on my match. I'm not going to talk about other things during the match. I'm not going to watch my friend's Vintage Cube draft in Discord. Like when my match is up, I need to be at the table. I need to be playing. And I wound up losing my last round to Izzet Prowess. I didn't lose another match between round 3 and round 7. That player went on to make top 8 on tiebreakers. 2 X2s maybe he was one of them. And I was like, wow, like it just felt really good to acknowledge not only like, oh, that I'd done this, but why I'd done it, and then just taking that step further of like making sure that when I'm going to commit to playing a challenge, like especially like a 4 or in this case a 5 p.m. standard challenge, like I was up until 10:30 at night or 11 at night playing out the whole thing, and it moved really quickly. Yeah. It was like, if I'm going to commit this kind of time, I need to give it that respect. And so just not falling back on kind of my bad moto habits that I've built up in the month or so since the RC of kind of taking things casually, but really like resetting myself and saying, okay, I need to focus in, and I need to do things that are going to focus me in, because I am playing this challenge to like not just to play a challenge because I want to, but like because I want to learn and I want to be playing this deck at a high proficiency and see what it can do. And so just making those changes in my moto space and making those adjustments, something other times I just kind of shrug and take the L's, but on Sunday I was like not having it with myself, and I adjust pretty quick.
I think that's good, man. Like it's maybe similar to mine, but like I think that sometimes we as like a collective unit in like competitive Magic, people will be like, I'm doing this thing to learn, but like if I don't succeed, it's okay because I'm still learning. But it's like, yeah, but it's still nice to like put your all into the times where you're learning. Like it's still nice to, like I played Blood Moon. I just copied a list, played Blood Moon at this team event, and I was like, well, there's no way this was right. Like I'm never double spelling with a Blood Moon when the Alpine Moon exists. Like I don't know. I like that for you. I think that you did the right thing, and you know, even though your result wasn't what you wanted, you learned, and that's like, it is the goal, but you also learned while learning that you were doing something in your process that was wrong. So.
Yeah, and when it comes to like the rest of the challenges I'm going to play in the year, unless it's something where I know I'm like setting out to play it, if it's like a sealed challenge, I've done this before. Where I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to like hang out, build my sealed pool, play matches, and chill out and hang out with my friends. That's one thing, but for a lot of these, especially as I'm ramping up for the RC, the Pro Tour, like I need to take it with that level of seriousness and like recognizing that and saying, okay, this is what I'm going to do next time. This I'm going to set myself up from the start and play around next time. Hopefully yields to me not being the one who talks about how my opponent made top 8 and gets me one of breakers in.
Yeah, I think it is just cool as an aside that like you're both like having this similar moment of just like wanting to care and wanting to put your all. I just think that stuff is like really cool in general. Even if it didn't go the way y'all would have like loved to have it go, whatever.
I had to drink champagne on my other podcast, Neat Nerd. I won't shout it out later, just because I'm going to shout it out now. Because like we're supposed to drink when we succeed. Like it's champagne if you succeed. It's brown liquor if you fail. And he called me after then. He's like, "Oh, we have a champagne week," and I was like, "Do we?" I was team no splits. Like I feel like this is a brown liquor week, and I don't know. I think that like the fact that I cared makes me want to like put myself in those matches more, like Mason just said.
Mm-hmm. Caring is cool.
Mason, what about you?
Yeah, so I would say my always improving moment hasn't fully crystallized, but I'm thinking about this a lot, so I just want to talk about it here. And this might even maybe become an episode or like an article I'll just write and put online. But kind of this idea of like, what are the implied things you agree to have happen when you play Magic competitively over a long period of time, and what are you signing up for? And kind of having, this idea of like a rules or like a contract of like what you're doing. And I think there's stuff like this that I've internalized over time. Like I mentioned it earlier, alluding to this point of the podcast. Of like, yeah, sometimes formats are just more fun when there's less pressure, and they're less fun when there's, a lot of pressure. And, part of what I think is fun is playing Pro Tour. So it means I'm going to, maybe play a deck I don't super love or push through something in order to like help reach that goal. Right. And sort of being realistic about like what you want, et cetera. And so just thinking about things like that. And, a couple of things that like jumped out to me as I thought about it more were stuff like, not every format's going to be fun if that's your main goal. And the idea that like, sometimes you're going to lose even when the matchup is good. And you know what? There's no bonus points for playing a deck that is, cooler or quote unquote harder, right? It's all about sort of getting things that like cross the finish line and or reach your goals. And so just really thinking about that and spending some time reflecting on this and sort of what it means to like have Magic be a huge role in your life in sort of a defined way. I think it's something that for a lot of players, they have rough ideas on, but don't really think too solidly about. Myself included, and spending some time thinking about this, I think is like step one in like a multi-step process of like feeling really happy, content, and sort of having guidelines and things to point to too.
I mean, I'll just throw myself into the bus here. Like the very beginning of this format, I played nothing but smuggler surprise decks to like try out, and like smuggler surprise got a lot of really good cards in this set. For those who don't know, like you won't know it because you'll never see them, but like there was an interaction where I was like, yeah, so like I lost to this Izzet deck on this turn, and I gained 27 life and drew 7 cards the next turn and died with the turn before that I could do it. And yeah, so fun fact, I died on turn 3. Like turn 4, I was gonna literally end the game. And I think that like, yeah, if in a perfect world Spencer gets to do that, like that's fun, that's cool, like that's what happens. But what Mason is saying is really important, is like you have to decide that you're okay with not getting to do that. That's what Spencer wants to do. Like he wants the turn 4 ramp combo deck coolness. But I also want to play competitive Magic, and that's not always going to work.
Yeah. And being like okay with that. And also, a lot of this site is like under the guiding light of like wanting to play pro tours or competitive magic or whatever that sort of means. And like identifying your kind of end point, I think helps create the road and like what makes sense for you, right? It's because like I mentioned earlier, like I'm never going to judge anyone who's like, I just want to play Dimir cards all the time, or I just want to play mono red cards all the time, or I just want to play combo all the time. That's great. Like that is good that you kind of know and have that, and just be realistic with yourself and others, and from there, But yeah, that was mine, and I'm sure we'll be retouching this topic in a couple weeks' time.
You know the conversation by joining the Patreon Discord at patreon.com/MTG. Becoming a patron of $5 or more. Join the public Discord for all of Easy Game Media, or just leave a comment in the YouTube comments. They're kind of like Mason just said. I hope to have a conversation about like how we engage with our listeners and things like that, as people have kind of divided on what they want to do. But with that being said, where can people find you, Mason?
You can find me on Twitter at Mason E. Clark. You can find me at twitch.tv/TheMasonClark. And if you want to reach out for coaching, you can reach out via Twitter DMs or my email, which is masoneclark@gmail.com. Abe, what about you?
People can find me over at Blue Sky, username More Nothings. Same with Twitter at More Nothings. I am not going to be doing any coaching between May and the end of June to be able to focus on the RC and the PT. But if you were interested and you want to schedule something for July, feel free to let me know and we can put something in the books. But yeah, that's where you find me. How about you, Spencer?
You can find me at Spencer13H, basically everywhere but Twitter, where I am He's Again. I am also just declining coaching right now. I got full and am gonna move and like have some life changes going on. But you can follow the show at CCMTG or CCMTG Pod everywhere. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening. It means the world to see the show grow the way that it has the last year, and we appreciate it every time we look at those numbers. Don't forget to leave a comment. It is the best way, whether you're on Spotify or YouTube or whatever, to help the show grow. And we'll see you all next week with a brand new episode of CCMTG.
Magic, magic, magic.